Good morning, and thank you for taking the time to attend today's workshop about ADU within the SCAG region. Before we start diving into the program, I would like to invite our Deputy Director of Planning, Jenna Hornstock, to kick off the workshop today. And Jenna, if you are on.
I'm on. Good morning, everybody. Yes. Hi. I get the great pleasure of welcoming you to our Toolbox Tuesday. We're going to focus on two very exciting topics, some of our ADU policies and resources, and also launching into our housing element Parcel Tool 2.0 or HELPR. So I just wanted to give a little context for this exciting work that SCAG is able to invest in and focus on. And so as you may know, every 8 years, we receive from the state the total number for our regional housing needs assessment, or RHNA, for our region. And then it's SCAG's job to develop a methodology that is consistent with state guidance and statutory regulations to allocate these units, these RHNA goals, to our 197 municipalities in the SCAG region. As many of you know, for the 6th cycle RHNA, covering 2021 to 2029, our allocation from the state was 1.3 million units, 3 times higher than our 5th cycle allocation. And rather than spend time kind of on the challenge that's been put before us, I want to focus on a really positive thing that came with this recent allocation, which is that through AB 101, the state allocated $250 million to support municipalities and their land use planning to accommodate the RHNA and to encourage municipalities to innovate in how they finance and streamline housing production. And as part of AB 101, they launched the Regional Early Action Program, or REAP program, and MPOs were allocated half, or 125 million, of that AB 101 funding. And SCAG got the largest REAP allocation of just over $47 million due to the size of our region and the size of our RHNA. So this is really the first time that SCAG has had resources to offer to municipalities, funding resources, along with allocating those units. So that's been really exciting for us. And with these resources, some of the highlights of what we've been able to fund, and hopefully that many of you are able to participate in. We gave about half of our REAP funds, or 23 million, to sub-regional partners, primarily the COGs, Councils of Government, through our sub-regional partnership program. And that was allocated non-competitively based on RHNA allocations, and we're supporting COGs across the region with regional planning to support land use, to streamline housing development, to look at innovative financing strategies. And many of these programs involve ADU-related work. So you're going to hear about some of that today. We also supported SCAG's regional data platform, or RDP, to provide our member cities access to the data that you need to do regional and local planning, and particularly to develop your housing elements. So you're going to hear about that today with the HELPR Tool, which is a part of that overall effort. We recently awarded $5 million to 26 applicants in our Housing and Sustainable Development Program under our SDP, or Sustainable Communities Call for Projects. And again, many of these projects we funded will support ADU development, and again, hear more about ADU resources than the work we're doing today. But we've done some really other innovative work, like our Call for Collaboration, which was a partnership with 3 foundations to fund community-based organizations that can bring more voices and diverse voices to the table, bring deeper community engagement to really promote equitable planning policies. And finally, just one more piece I want to highlight from our REAP program. We are currently procuring a team to develop and lead 8 housing policy leadership academies across the region. So each of these training academies will be made up of a cohort of up to 40 people. And the idea is to really bring together elected officials, staff, commissioners, and a broad array of community stakeholders to learn about an array of topics around housing development, and really create pro-housing coalitions across the region. So this is just a sampling of the work that we're doing with our REAP funds. We are looking forward to sharing some great resources today and to continue working with you to deliver on our region's housing needs moving forward. So very happy to just give an overview of where this great work is coming from, and I'm going to turn it back to Tom.
Thank you, Jenna, for the great information. So as you know, we have a packed agenda today with a lot of good information about ADU from many great speakers today, including Jenna just did. From the City of Garden Grove, we have Lee Marino and Maria Parra. From Cal Poly Pomona, Department of Regional and Urban Regional Planning, we have Dr. Beck Garcia and Dr. Kim from the department. From SCAG side, we have Jenna, who just spoke, Mayon Johnson, Kevin Kane, myself, Tom, and Linda Whitten. So today, we're gonna give you everything about ADU, everything that we know, and all the experience that we can share with you, and finally a live demo. Before we start, we would like to have a polling question to kind of help us to understand each other a bit. So Jennifer, can you please launch the question real quick? And just to understand, we just wanted to know which of the following do you represent? So are you from the local government within SCAG region? Are you an MPO, COG, or are you a ADU builder, supplier, or are you a Southern California housing developer, and so on? So please take some time to kind of go over the selections here and put in this selection. So this will help us to understand you better. And so we can, dedicate more resources to answer some of the questions that you may have. So far we have roughly more than 60% of the participants here today representing the local government within SCAG region. Actually 59%, and then 16% from MPO or COG within California. And then the next one is a consultant in planning, engineering, architecture. So welcome all of you today, and welcome to the webinar. And do I just click exit out? Okay. And this is just some housekeeping. The meeting is 2 hours, so please mute your line if you're not speaking. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session so we can answer all your questions. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat. We have a staff to monitor and make sure we'll answer your question at the end, or put a raise hand function. We'll log all the questions and post it later. The recording of this webinar will be posted on the website, and a link will be sent to all of you at the end. And this is just an overall of the agenda today. So I mentioned a lot of great information, but basically we're just gonna take you through the ADU history from the state level to all the way to local level, and then how we determine, identify using advanced GIS technologies to identify potential detached ADU eligible parcels. And finally, some GIS supports, and also a live demo of the HELPR version 2.0 that Jenna mentioned, and we can open up for discussion. All right, so with that, I would like to invite Linda Whitten, our Senior Housing Policy Advisor from SCAG, to give us to start. Thank you.
Welcome. We're happy to share with you today the very substantial potential that SCAG has for development of accessory dwelling units within our region. I do want to qualify my colleague Tom's assertion that we're going to share everything about ADUs, because that is there's too much information to share in one webinar. But the state has provided resources, including this ADU handbook, which explains the recent evolution of state focus on ADU development. Even though second units or granny flats were authorized in state law since the mid-1980s, a lot of development formal did not occur during that period for a number of barriers. So as the state's housing crisis has escalated, the state moved in recent years to amend the laws and focused in particular with obligations and responsibilities for ADU development on the local planning and permitting process. So this has oversight from not only the State Department of Housing and Community Development, but for jurisdictions within the coastal zone, also the Coastal Commission. Next. SCAG has also included support for ADU development within its regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy, Connect SoCal. Next. So the ADU opportunities are part of a growing interest in small homes. You'll find a host of media with design options, advances in technology, and you can even order kits on Amazon. Next. So ADUs will continue to have an important role housing seniors as granny flats, but moving beyond just the option, actually subsidizing their affordability, as the city of Los Angeles has done with its ADU Accelerator program, is an important way of scaling up granny flat development. But beyond that, ADUs can serve a host of other housing needs. Importantly, providing a source of income for homeowners, and it offer one of the easier, or at least shorter, development timeframes for adding housing within neighborhoods with access to jobs and other amenities to address fair housing goals, amongst other objectives. They can be used to promote design innovation and certainly support the business growth and job development within our areas from the manufacturers and suppliers. And they also lend themselves to integrated planning with transportation planning to address some of the transportation and other impacts. Next. So there's an increase in the modular development industry, a part of factory-built housing where the state pre-certifies manufacturers of components. So some of the sites will lend themselves to modular ADU options. Next. But despite these opportunities, ADU development at scale presents some major challenges. They range from, in particular, complicated permitting processes, difficult development standards, neighborhood resistance, difficulty getting a handle on costs upfront, in particular, a lack of financing, although we were very pleased to see the governor's recent May revised proposal propose an increase to a pilot ADU program at Cal HFA. And also landlord property management can be daunting for homeowners. Next. So a particular focus of the state on supporting the scaling up is requiring ministerial or by right processing of ADUs, and with limits on how the extent to which they can be limited within residential or mixed use zones based upon only water and sewer service, impacts on traffic flow and public safety. So the state has identified standard practices known as a statewide exemption ADU, which our researchers will describe later in our presentations today. And importantly, ADU applications are to be acted on within 60 days. So this streamlining option has other transferability for other housing processing from lessons learned. Next. So the key document where there is responsibility and opportunity for addressing ADU policies are local housing elements. Currently, updates are underway that are due in October of this year, where the local government has to go through a process of specifically analyzing its zoning and development standards relative to those of state law, identifying constraints and policies and programs to overcome them. There's a particular requirement to incentivize ADU development for low and moderate income households. And importantly, a responsibility, especially if ADUs are used to address the RHNA, to monitor their permitting and affordability, and perhaps to amend or revise policies as may be warranted. Next. So as Jenna mentioned, we have a substantial regional housing need allocation to be addressed by our local governments. And so in doing so, local governments must ensure that the units that they're permitting meet the census definition of a housing unit, are reported annually to the Department of Finance, use a demonstrated level of affordability if you want them credited to lower income categories, and are required to report annually in the annual progress report to HCD. Next. So in doing so, in projecting some of the tools that we are describing today in HELPR and that our researchers have focused on are a first step in helping to identify that capacity, but need to be supplemented by assessment of development trends of ADUs in individual jurisdictions, subregions, and within the region. So currently data is available from 2018 and 19. When 2020 data is available later this summer, there will be an ability to analyze the development trends since the laws were changed most recently. So this then will provide a backdrop for identifying proactive policies to include in-housing elements and plans to address these needs of affordability and so forth. So we will refer later to the pre-qualified affordability data for the sixth cycle that SCAG is making available. Next. So these kind of mapping tools are an important opportunity for further refining and screening local development potential that SCAG has identified at a first cut kind of scale. So they can be used not only for identifying particular focus areas for incentivizing and integration with other planning, but also for careful monitoring of permit activity in your jurisdictions or subregion. Next. So the required monitoring and reporting requirements provide an excellent opportunity for local governments to publicize dashboards about activity within your jurisdictions that can be helpful for both homeowners and developers alike. Next. So while we're focusing today on some mapping tools for further refining capacity, we will continue to provide technical assistance as we go on some of the other housing policies and practices that can be helpful in ramping up ADU development. For example, garage conversions are one of the most prevalent types of ADU development. But particularly important is homeowner outreach and education. So we are pleased today to have our colleagues from the city of Garden Grove with us to describe how they have increased and addressed ADU development within their city. Lee?
There we go. Thank you, Linda, and everyone here participating today. We really appreciate being invited here to talk about our experiences with ADUs. Just a little background, the city of Garden Grove has a population of approximately 176,000 people with about 48,000 residential units in the city at the last count. Interesting, since the laws changed in 2017, making the construction of accessory dwelling units easier to construct, the city has processed a total of 870 applications and have permitted 790 units, with 545 of them final to date. Out of those 545, 122 of them have been conversions. So what we've been seeing mostly are brand new ADUs, whether attached or detached. Prior to 2017, we very rarely saw an application come to the city, even though those, as Linda had mentioned, the second unit ordinances were in place since the early 80s. I think a lot of it was because it wasn't on people's radar, and therefore they weren't as controversial as we are seeing them today. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we were asked to talk about is some of the challenges that the city of Garden Grove faced with the new change of laws. So with the changes in 2017 and 2020, staff was really challenged with getting an ordinance approved by the city that would comply with state law, streamline the permitting process because of the short timelines that are required to approve an ADU, making sure that we addressed the concerns raised by the city's residents and the decision makers, as well as providing the necessary public outreach. And Maria later will talk about our public outreach efforts. In regard to the streamlining process, while the city's planning and building divisions we have a very active planning and building division, we're quite busy, streamlining the permitting process for ADUs really fit into the city's overall goal of streamlining all of our processes. So for us, it was a very logical step for us to accomplish. It just kind of fit right into what we were already doing. We really didn't see, while the 60-day review period seems a little bit daunting at first, especially with a busy building and planning department. So far, we've been really good about being able to maintain those requirements, and Maria will talk about the processing later. The creation of the ordinance was a little bit more difficult than the streamlining, since we were tasked with balancing the pressure from the part of the community that wanted to build. They want to build ADUs because they see it as a great revenue stream. It also allows those who choose to provide housing for family members. And so from that aspect, I would say we had about a third of the community that were right on board with these. And then we had to balance all of that with the concerns from the other residents of Garden Grove who are not supportive of ADUs. They are concerned that they will foster additional overcrowding issues. They're concerned with the lack of parking and how that parking would be forced to go on already crowded streets. And they were also raising concerns with potential impacts to sewer and water resources, especially because we do have a area of the city that we're sewer deficient, and the city has been working on that very slowly because it costs a lot of money. While these issues were raised with the change in the law of 2017, when we first amended our code, surprisingly, that ordinance went through rather smoothly. Although the public that supported the ADUs didn't want to limit the size of the units or require a minimum lot size, that ordinance that was approved then did limit the ADU size to 800 square feet and required a minimum lot size of 7,200 square feet. It really wasn't until the current law change that and further took local control away from the cities, that staff was challenged with making sure we had an ordinance that was being proposed that addressed the decision makers' concerns, the public concerns, as well as being consistent with state law. When the current ordinance that was just adopted went through the process, it originally was approved by the Planning Commission, then went to City Council. The ordinance included requirements that limited the number of bedrooms to 3 and the unit size to 1,200 square feet, with the remaining of the ordinance basically conforming with state law. However, upon review, City Council wanted staff to make a few changes that included limiting the number of bedrooms to 2 and limiting the size of the unit to 1,000 square feet. The ordinance was then remanded back to the Planning Commission. Because of these changes, we were really concerned, what would HCD say, especially because we weren't sure about the control and the number of bedrooms. So Maria Parra, our senior planner, requested that HCD review our draft ordinance prior to bringing it back through the public hearing process. One of the things we had heard from one of our counterparts in another community was that they had received negative comments back from HCD after their ordinance was approved by City Council. So they had to take it back through the public hearing process to modify it. And it was one thing that we really didn't want to have to do. So when HCD reviewed our draft, which was before the ADU handout was circulated, They provided us their opinion and told us where the ordinance needed to be changed for it to be consistent with state law, one of which was not having a limit on the number of bedrooms. So we made that change and then we brought it back through the public hearing process, but we maintained the 1,000 square foot unit size maximum. So during that process, and we thought we were doing okay, we had a portion of the community raise concerns with limiting the size of the units to 1,000 square feet. They wanted 1,200 square foot ADU size. So based on those concerns and HCD comments, City Council did finally adopt the current ordinance that we just sent up to HCD with the removal of the limit of the number of bedrooms and the increase of the maximum unit size. So what was really good for us taking it at HCD, the draft to have them review it, is we learned really two helpful things. One was we knew exactly where our ordinance was lacking and where it needed to be changed. And it also helped give the decision makers cover on items that they originally would really have liked to have controlled, such as the number of bedrooms. It also helped when having to explain why when an ADU is within a half mile of a transit stop, why they didn't have to have parking. That, I think, was one of the best things that the city did. And thanks to Maria, we went through that process, I think, relatively smoothly. Finally, one of the other challenges we're having is right now we're in the, like a lot of cities, we're in the middle of our housing element. And the city of Garden Grove has a very high RHNA number of over 19,000 units. And staff and the decision makers were concerned with the limit that is placed on us for being able to count ADUs towards meeting our numbers. The city's estimate for being able to count ADUs toward our numbers is around 2,500 units, which is based on past production. What it doesn't do, it doesn't take into account the rapid increase of ADUs the city is experiencing and is expected to experience over this next RHNA cycle. And we're not the only city. I think some of our neighboring cities are with the same demographics is experiencing the same issues. So because of this concern, we are currently gathering data so we can try and increase the number of units we can count. So part of our streamlining application, we have included questions that requires anticipated rental amount and the number of people that the unit will be rented to. What we're hoping this will also do would help us determine which are the potential affordable units, because one of the other things is with the units we're able to count, how do we figure out to count which ones are affordable and at what level? So we're right now we're in the process of trying to collect as much data as possible that'll help us outside of us helping finance an ADU that would make it an affordable unit. So what this does is this leads me to introducing Maria Parra, the City of Garden Grove Senior Planner, to discuss our permitting process and the city's outreach efforts. Maria?
Maria, I think you're muted.
Thank you. I am on mute. Thank you. So in the next slide, I'm going to discuss the ADU approval process. So as Linda mentioned, state law does require local jurisdictions to ministerially approve ADUs and JADUs within 60 days of receiving a complete application. And as you can see from our ADU production, Garden Grove has gotten a pretty good handle on the ADU process. So we have charted our ADU process in the flow chart on your screen, but it's also important to note that once the 60-day state approval deadline is met, there is still a series of housing reporting that follows. So from the timeline on your screen, the 60-day process is outlined in steps 1 to 4. So in step 1, as with most jurisdictions due to the pandemic, Garden Grove had to change the way we do business by shifting to virtual services. And during the pandemic, we moved to email and phone calls as our primary form of communication. And the planning division uses email to perform courtesy reviews of proposed ADU applications before projects are submitted officially to Building and Safety for plan check review to ensure code compliance. So step 2, we created what we consider to be a comprehensive ADU application, which includes detailed information of what applicants are required to include on the plans, and also the supporting documentation that must be submitted along with the ADU submittal packet. The application also includes a tolling letter that allows the applicant to toll the 60-day review when the plans are in their possession. And this is more of a safeguard for the city, since there have been instances where applicants kept the plans in their possession for several weeks before resubmitting the plans back to the city. So with the tolling letter, it gives the applicants 2-week timeframe to resubmit the plans to the city, and allows also the city to align with the 60-day state law approval date. As Lee mentioned, the application also includes rental income information that we collect to determine if the ADU would be considered a potential affordable unit. Step 3 is the plan check review process. So some cities have a separate zoning approval for ADUs. However, we found that one review process is the most effective for approving ADUs, which we conduct through a building plan check process. Although we hope to make the approval process even more streamlined with the implementation of standard ADU plans. And Garden Grove was selected as a recipient of SCAG's SCP program for advancing ADUs, and through the creation of standard and pre-approved plans, it would actually benefit homeowners, since most of the correction related to ADU are coming from our Building and Safety division as structural corrections, which could be addressed with pre-approved standard plans, which would help streamline the overall review process. So once permits are issued for ADUs, the 60-day state clock ends, but the ADU process continues. Under step 5 is the construction phase, and constructions for new ADUs typically range from 6 months to 1 year, and for conversions, 3 months to 6 months. And the average permit fees that we're seeing in Garden Grove range from $9,000 to $13,000. When the building permits are finalized, then comes the annual reporting. So we report to HCD as part of the annual housing report, which tracks implementation of the housing element and RENA. And we also report to the Department of Finance as well as CDR. Next slide. So community outreach has been very important and successful strategy for Garden Grove for promoting ADUs. And it is also a strategy for providing correct ADU information to the community. What's interesting is that prior to state law taking effect both in 2017 and 2020, members of our community already knew about the upcoming state law changes and were calling planning to inquire. Unfortunately, some of the information circulated in the community about the new state law changes was incorrect, and Garden Grove used community outreach as an avenue to dispel misinformation. In 2017, when the first round of ADU state law changes took effect, the city hosted a successful in-person ADU community meeting. This second time around, because of the pandemic, the city hosted a virtual ADU forum last month after the city council adopted the ADU ordinance. And with the assistance of our Office of Public Relations, we launched an extensive campaign to advertise the ADU webinar, which included a multi-language press release to the local media outlets, social media posts, and also creating a multilingual ADU flyer. And this was in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Korean. And the webinar covered general zoning and building related topics, and it also included a question and answer portion as well. And the ADU was recorded and is posted on the city's ADU webpage, which the link is provided on your screen. We also had local Vietnamese outlets in Garden Grove that have been very and extremely beneficial for promoting ADUs. So we had the opportunity to recently appear on 2 weekly Vietnamese talk shows with 2 of our council members, Thad Bui and Tu Ha Nguyen, to discuss ADUs, and we hope to launch an ADU series to discuss other important ADU topics. And lastly, we created multi-language ADU handouts that are available in Spanish, in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Korean, and which are also available on the city's webpage. We created a total of 5 handouts to cover each of the ADU topics constructions and topics and for single family and multiple family developments, as well as JADUs. And the handouts actually have been very useful for our customer because it covers the most frequently asked questions about ADUs and JADUs. And the handouts are also available on the city's webpage. And to conclude, our efforts through the years have shown that the city of Garden Grove understands that ADUs fill an important housing need in the community. And with the proactive strategies we have implemented to streamline the ADU process, as well as the community outreach to get the community informed about ADUs, has actually proven to be successful for increasing the ADU production in Garden Grove. So this concludes Garden Grove's presentation, and I will hand it over to Sohrab Beg.
Thank you, Maria. I'm Sohrab Beg. Thank you all for participating in this webinar. I'm a faculty in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at Cal Poly Pomona. The next two speakers and myself are Cal Poly Pomona faculty, and we're presenting our project with SCAG that is titled ADU Potential in the SCAG region. With amendments to the state ADU that are effective on January 1st, 2021, now ADUs are allowed within single-family residential, multifamily residential, and mixed-use zones where residential uses are permitted by right or by conditional use. And there are more, such as adequate infrastructure services, parking requirement exemptions, setbacks, reduced impact fees, etc. With this information, this team reviewed local ADU ordinances to understand where local governments are regarding the state mandate, whether a local ordinance has been adopted and updated to conform with the state law. That's the first part of analysis. And then second part is estimating ADU capacity using GIS, Geographic Information System, and parcel level geospatial data. We assessed how many parcels in the SCAG region are eligible to build an ADU with various policy scenarios. Next slide, please. Before we get to any details of our study findings, we would like to emphasize the scope of the study to eliminate any possible confusion. We considered detached ADUs only, excluding any other variant of the detached forms, such as attached ADUs from garage conversion, junior ADUs, and existing non-conforming ADUs. And the minimum size of a detached ADU in this analysis is 800 square feet. With these assumptions, we estimated number of detached ADU eligible parcels. We also retrieved and analyzed 68 local ADU ordinances. Based on the ordinance review, we selected and summarized best practices in the promotion of ADU development, and we primarily focused on local cases in California. And since we use GIS, the characteristics of the parcels that can be queried and calculated in GIS were considered in screening and eligibility determination processes. And what we draw from this analysis is the number of ADU eligible parcels, not the number of ADU units that can be built. Next slide, please. From our literature review, we found that ADUs have been resisted by single-family residents concerning issues associated with increased density in their neighborhoods. Now, the state law advises local governments to permit ADUs based on adequacy of water and sewer services, impacts on traffic flow, and public safety. These potential impacts of ADUs are valid and need to be addressed, but instead of regulating them at the scale of ADUs, community-wide planning processes for transportation and public safety policies and mitigation measures would be more appropriate. The literature extensively discussed challenges with street parking requirements as significant barriers to ADU potential. Now, with the parking exemptions and allowing tandem parking on a driveway as a replacement of existing parking spaces, more parcels become eligible for ADUs. With these changes, a complete elimination of parking requirements for ADUs is not at all an idealistic suggestion for local governments to consider. The literature found that ADU construction has been further complicated by existing non-conforming ADUs. But now a 5-year delay of enforcement gives the owners more time to correct the violation and an opportunity to legalize the units, which hopefully would help bring up the existing non-conforming ADUs to the mainstream economy. Beyond what is mandated by the state, local governments can elect to go beyond to further streamline ADU permitting and reduce barriers to ADU productions. These are our assessments of where we are. I'm passing it to Dr. Brian Garcia.
Thank you, Sora. So jumping off the literature review, we did a best practices in ADU delivery and construction review. So a best practices review is very similar to a literature review, but we looked at all sorts of current data sources, documents, ordinances, websites, city planning agency information. And what we found were 3 avenues of challenges, but also areas for improvement for ADU delivery. One was financial support. So loan structures are needed in ADU amounts and timeframes. So smaller amounts, shorter timeframes. The added value of an ADU is often not considered in the property value. So providing existing floor plans saves fees on architecture and engineering design services. It also provides the confidence that ADUs will be approved for a building permit and speeds up the total process of ADU construction. Often developers of ADUs, homeowners that are building ADUs are on tight schedules due to their financing. So even if cities do not have pre-approved plans for permitting, floor plan designs can still be used to shop for construction estimates, still save time on design. Time is money. Floor plans provided can also be used to judge where an ADU might be placed on a homeowner's site. With those benefits in mind, the research team created 19 sample floor plans for ADUs after a review of case studies in ADUs that were built from life. Next, please. And so here are a sample of those. And as you can see, you get a lot with ADUs. You get 2 bedrooms, a full bath, a full kitchen, and these are all at slightly under 800 square feet. They range from 720 square feet to 740 square feet. Next, please. The next step was an analysis of existing SCAG jurisdictions and ordinances. So we went through, we collected all these different ordinances. Many cities did not update their ADU ordinances, but we looked at as many as we could that had updated them. And here's a quick chart of our spread of ordinances that we analyzed by county, and we compared it with the state law. So we looked at whether the setback requirements were the same, whether they were allowed or more generous in where they allowed ADUs in terms of zones, whether they allowed more generous unit sizes, or what their approach was to parking and fees and approval process. So next slide, please. So we found that most ordinances adhered very closely to the state requirement. We found very few cities that were more generous than the state requirement. So if the state requires 800, that they must provide 800 square feet of an ADU, most places only allowed 1,000 square feet, for example. But in many places, setbacks were waived for certain conditions. So if you're remodeling an existing structure, the setbacks are historical setbacks. So you could be within the current 4-foot setback. Also, if there was no other place for an 800 square foot ADU, it can be built in a setback. Parking is also not required for a variety of exceptions. Some cities looked at all these exceptions and they said, well, let's just waive all of our city, most of our urbanized areas are within these parking exceptions. So let's waive the parking requirement for ADUs. So this may be something to look at in the future to see if this can encourage, promote, or remove some hurdles for ADU delivery. It's also important to look at expanding ADUs to more zones as appropriate. Other dwelling units are often allowed in commercial areas. And so of course, this would be on a case-by-case basis. Commercial zones are not all equal, but it may be an opportunity for more housing units. The city of Los Angeles, denser than most cities and possibly more at risk to fire hazards, allows ADUs in hillside and fire zones depending on proximity to a 20-foot wide street for fire truck access. Large areas of the region that we looked at are composed of hillsides and fire risk conditions. Other fire suppressant or technological solutions may be considered to account for this and open up hillside and fire zones for ADUs. So, as I did when we were doing the research, I will now turn it over to Dr. Do Kim, who developed these scenarios. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. So in addition to what Dr. Garcia has now analyzed, one of the main goals of this project was to identify ADU eligible parcels according to state law. So the starting point of that part was that analyzing what state law requires in terms of ADU development. So I don't want to actually go over these crazy, gigantic tables, but the point of this table is that my team is reinterpreted it, what state regulation or state law requires, and then we reinterpret those state regulations into the sort of GIS language so that we can do the data query and data analysis. So the column on the left-hand side is what states ADU laws requires, and the column on the right-hand side is how we interpret it. So I don't want to go over this, the table in the details. So let me walk you guys through how we did it. So in general, so we took a two-step approach. First step, we have to find the parcels according to each locations. So the parcel is within the eligible areas or has a land use allowed by state laws. And the second step was that we analyzed the condition, physical condition of the parcel. So that's, we calculate if a ADU unit can be built on this particular parcel. So next slide. So location analysis, there's a bunch of conditions that regulations, requires in terms of location of the eligible parcels. So one is the fire hazard area, and state law also says that the ADU should be built in the area with the adequate water and sewer services. So we took a look at that. Also, we took a look at the area, we identified the area with less impact on traffic flow. So during, with the multiple steps of the spatial analysis, we find it out, or those parcels, within the eligible areas. Next slide. And also we took a look at the land use. Obviously, state laws requires ADU should be built in a residential and mixed-use land use. So we identified residential and mixed-use parcels according to the land use code. But the issue during this analysis we confront was that there's a little mismatch between the SCAG land use code and county's details land use code. So there's some examples on the figures. The SCAG code says that's a multi-family residential, but obviously some area is like a common streets in the large condominium complex or something like that. Another issues that we identified was that sort of like a near future residential development. What does that mean is that the parcel is already subdivided into the residential zoning code, but there's no building constructed here. But obviously there will be soon to primary residential building or dwelling unit will be built, then that's to be a potential ADU parcel. So there's a couple of issues we identified so that we did three approaches. We did three different analyses. approach number one was that we just super depend on SCAG land use code, and then we sorted it out residential and mixed use parcel based on SCAG land use code. Approach number two was we solely depend on county's detailed land use code. And approach number three was that we use the SCAG land use code. At the same time, we also took a look at the general plans code, which sort of shows the future development pattern. So try to capture those subdivided parcels with no building. Next slide. And after we find it out, parcels that has a land use code, a proper land use code for the ADU development. Also, we identify the parcel within the area that's eligible for the ADU development. We did a calculation for each individual parcel so that we calculate quote unquote buildable area. Buildable area is nothing but total parcel areas minus bunch of the area occupied by something else than developable piece of area, right? So that includes footprint of the building, main primary residential building, also driveway and setback required by state law, and the required parking space. So subtracting all those area with the occupied or something else from the area of a parcel, the remainder should be the area can be designated for the ADU development. So if, according to our calculation, if that buildable area is larger or equal to 800 square feet, we counted it as a ADU eligible parcel. Next slide. And that calculation was not that straightforward because there's a lot of exemption policy. So like Lee and Maria pointed out earlier, if this property or parcel is a nearby transit stop, then state law says that parking requirement can be waived, right? So depending on the conditions, that there is conditions that we waive the setback requirement, and there is a condition that we waive parking requirement, and there is the condition that we can waive both of them. So depending on those conditions, we apply different calculation method of the buildable area so that we can kind of screen it out those parcels, very detailed level. Next slide. So this is what we found it out. Actually, as I said earlier, we attempted the three different approaches. As you can see, there's those three different approaches. The output of those three different approaches not that terribly different from each other. I mean, Los Angeles County shows some variation. Otherwise, it's very consistent. So that the numbers in the bottom is the total in the SCAG region. So I mean, give and takes about a little less than 3 million parcels is eligible for ADU development. Next slide. And based on that ADU eligible parcel, according to state law, we add another layers of sort of a simulation. We developed a few policy scenario options, and then we want to analyze what kind of impact of this policy scenario option on the ADU development. So we developed a 6 different scenario options, and the first option is how about some ADU allow some ADU in the fire hazard area. And then fire hazard areas, in this case, not entire fire hazard area, but 100 feet from the primary and secondary road, so that fire truck can access to in the emergency situation. And another scenario option that we add there is outside of adequate water and sewer services. Same idea we apply to here, so that we sorted it out the parcel within the 100 feet from the primary and secondary road. That's we counted as a sort of an eligible ADU, eligible parcel for the ADU development. And another scenario option is how about reducing setback requirements. right now, according to the state law, it's 4 feet rear and side setback, but how about we reduce the 2 feet? And another scenario option is the smaller ADU. The sort of criteria and threshold that we used earlier for the state calculation was the 800 square feet. But how about we reduce that to 600 square feet? So 600 building a 600 square feet ADU unit is allowed in this scenario simulation. And how about the 2-story ADU development? Right now, state regulation, the height limit according to state regulation is like 16 feet. But if we increase that height limit up to like 20 feet, then we can build a 2-story ADU. So how about that building a 2-story ADUs? And removal of parking requirements. I mean, according to our analysis, there's a lot of parcels has been waived from the parking requirement because of various reasons. So that's why don't we just widespread this parking requirement removal idea to all those parcels? That's another scenario option. So by mixing up these different scenario options, I think that local governments can play how those scenario options impacts on their ADU development in their jurisdiction. I mean, that's the whole idea of this development of scenario simulations. And next slide. And after we did this policy scenario options, I did a analysis based on these scenario options. So as you can see, the graph on your left-hand side is the ADU eligible parcel by scenario options by different county. So obviously the impact of those scenario options is huge in suburban and rural counties like San Bernardino and Ventura, rather than in LA or Orange County, like urban counties, right? I mean, the patterns of all those different scenario options is very, very similar and very consistent. But the Ventura County in the case, the large impacts is by the fire hazard area scenario options. And the graph on your right-hand side shows the actually ADU eligible parcel by scenario in the SCAG priority growth area. So once again, the pattern is very similar in general overall on your left-hand side, but as you can see, there's some different stories we can find it out, right? So for example, the 2-story ADU development and a setback scenario option has most significant impacts on this ADU eligible parcel in the PGAs. So that's, PGA is like a priority growth area. So all those parcels in that area is, very urban types of parcels. So that in order to, increase the ADU development in that urban types of parcels, waiving a setback requirements or allowing buildings 2-story ADU must be very beneficial. So we did this kind of calculation and comparison for the different scenario options, but since we developed the 6 different scenario options, if you mix it up, the 6 different scenario options, there's like a 64 different scenario options that you calculate. I mean, I'm not able to show all those 64 different scenario option combinations here, but that's definitely doable. So can you, next slide? So next slide shows that GIS-based scenario simulation tools I developed. So, I mean, as you can see on the left-hand side, there's the left-hand side image is the interface, the GUI of the tools. So the users choose the city and county they want to work on, and if the users choose the yes or no option for each scenario options, and once again, that's going to make a 64 different scenario combination. Then this tool will select all those parcels that is the ADU eligible parcels, and then returns the total number of the ADU eligible parcels within the city by the scenario combination. So I believe the part of this database and simulation tool is already embedded in the SCAG tool. So Tom and Kevin will show you some demo in the futures, but this tool will also help the local government to explore some scenario option and scenario development. Next slide. So the conclusion is that obviously a lot of local governments follow the state regulation very closely. So there is some handful cities and local governments doing a more lenient or permissive ADU policy than what state law requires. But in majority, the local government works with the state requirements. And as I pointed out earlier, there's about 3 million, give and take, about 3 million parcels is eligible to construct the ADU in the SCAG region. And as I pointed out earlier, again, the scenario simulation tools will help the local government to explore their policy options, and a lot of sort of a fun play local planners can do with that simulation tool, I hope. And the last but not least, I just want to give you the heads up about this analysis. And we already emphasized that the scope of the project at the very earlier, but I just want to make sure one more time that this database that's 3 million parcels is not perfect. I mean, what I want to say is that's not an ending final product. That's another starting point. I want to say that way, because this analysis is 100% purely based on physical condition of the parcel. That physical condition, even if that physical condition is eligible for the ADU development, that doesn't mean automatically ADU will be constructed in that parcel, because there are so many other factors that influence on final decision on a property owner to build ADU or not, right? Their socioeconomic characteristic and financial situation, and there's so many other factors. So it would be ideal to conduct large-scale survey to get to know, what are the very critical factors to influence on the property owner's final decision on the ADU construction. So that's the very important part of the ADU construction, but this analysis, this project does not address that part. And another point that I want to make it before I conclude this presentation is that the spatial data and spatial analysis we did it is that based on the available, the spatial data set. So with this regional scale analysis, which is the more than 5 million parcels in the scale region. So the analysis we did it at this regional scale, we were not able to take a look at very detailed condition for every single parcel one by one. So if there's better spatial data, then we can perform better. I mean, we use the top-notch database available for now, but that doesn't mean the database that we use is perfect. So, I mean, I don't have that part, I don't include that part in this presentation, but if you read our final report, and there is some sort of cross-validation analysis, we did it, separated from this analysis, and I just introduced and overviewed so that we see some discrepancy between this regional analysis for some subset analysis we did. So, I mean, obviously, if we use the more data, it will be better. Another just good example is a tree. So in the parcel, if there's a large tree, I don't think the owner is gonna, decide to build the ADU cutting that large tree, right? So, I mean, that kind of stuff. So as you can see earlier in the buildable area calculation, we didn't include trees and some other objects in the property. So there's a lot of things that we can improve in the future. But only things that I want to emphasize one more time is that 3 million person is not the final product. I mean, it's at the local level, in a smaller scale. If we do the further analysis, I think we can sort it out and filter it out and the better, so that we can have a little better eligible ADU parcel calculation. Okay, so that's it for my presentation. I want to toss my microphone to the top.
All right, thank you, Do. And the next presenter is going to be Kevin Kane. I just wanted to remind you guys that we are a little bit over half of the webinar already. So you have already seen a lot of the policies, history of ADU, and the methodology that Cal Poly did. From now on, we'll focus more on the SCAG side of the housing element support, and we're going to do a live demo and so on. So stick with us until the end, please. And I would like to invite Kevin.
Hi, Tom. Thanks. Kevin Kane, previously program manager for demographics and housing policy, back to my old home of being SCAG demographer, but happy to have the opportunity here to talk a little bit about just kind of a recap of some of the technical assistance that SCAG has available. And Tom, I think you could put all the text on this slide here now. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Professor Kim, and to all the presenters for setting us up here. So I know that most of the folks on the line here are local jurisdictions or consultants through local jurisdictions. So I'm sure you are keenly aware of the October 15th deadline for housing element adoption. We know it's a tight deadline and that using the newly available LEAP and REAP funding definitely takes time as well. So even before we were done with the final RENA allocations, SCAG started working on technical assistance using available staff, available expertise, and available data to start to put a few of the early pieces together to hopefully help check some of those boxes. In addition to the sub-regional programs and support, which Mayan Johnson, my colleague, is going to touch on a little bit at the end of the presentation, we released 3 main tools in 2020, which you can access on our housing element website, scag.ca.gov/housing-elements. That's the home for all of this stuff. The first 2 were actually developed in collaboration with HCD and have been pre-certified for your use in the housing element, meaning no additional analysis is needed by a local jurisdiction if you use the pre-certified local housing data or ADU affordability levels that we have here. The third is the HELPR tool. It's been a great mechanism to get a lot more mileage, a lot more use out of open data, which I know from a lot of discussions, open data tends to sometimes sit on shelves. So we were very happy to be able to kind of put this to good use. And Professor Kim Garcia and Beck's presentation is another kind of example of that. So Tom, next slide, please. As you probably know, the housing element has a required section which is titled Housing Needs. It's not the same H and N in RENA. That is a different conceptualization of housing needs. But the bottom line is that's the place where you assess a couple of dozen data points for a local jurisdiction. We've gone ahead and grabbed all of these data points for all jurisdictions. It comes out to 35 tables and figures across 8 categories. And we've even made a little brief text-based narrative section based on some of the key points. It's kind of a dynamic text engine. You can see it on the bottom right here on the example of this population trend graphic here. We've noticed that local jurisdictions are using these data in a few different ways, depending on the style or sophistication of your housing element document. There is a 22-page PDF for each local jurisdiction, which you can just use straight up. You can perhaps snapshot the individual tables and figures and put that in with some of your own narratives and style. There's even a tab in the Excel document for each jurisdiction so that you can grab the actual data and the actual figures and change the color schemes or style or what have you. Or you can actually use the raw data itself to make your own figures, so long as you cover all the topics covered in here. Again, this one is pre-certified by HCD for use. Next, please. The second piece of technical assistance that we have is the SCAG Regional ADU Affordability Analysis. Now, this addresses step 2 in how to include ADUs in the housing element. HCD's site inventory guidelines, as you know well, I'm sure, govern the rules on how to assess ADUs. But the first step is to estimate how many ADUs you anticipate in the jurisdiction over the next eight years. As we heard from Lee and Maria from the city of Garden Grove, HCD does offer some safe harbors, as they call them, which are based on past production. Essentially, you can simply use your construction since January 2018 or 5 times the previous planning period construction trends before that to come up with a number. And correct me if I'm wrong, it was something in the neighborhood of 2,500 or so for Garden Grove, somewhat reflective of a pretty substantial acceleration in recent ADU production. However, that kind of illustrates, the case that there has been a massive push for ADUs from a number of areas, and past trends may not necessarily be the best way to assess future production. So certainly it is possible within the confines of the HCD guidelines to estimate a higher ADU number, so long as it's supported by analysis or policy, local ordinances. One of the reasons we're sharing here the Cal Poly study and the HELPR Tool's analysis of ADU physical capacity is to just kind of help consider in a fairly standardized way, region-wide, what a hypothetical ADU build-out could look like in a local jurisdiction, and how various features of local ordinances could perhaps get a city closer toward achieving its full potential or the level of ADUs that they would like to see in there. So once you have this step 1 down, the number of ADUs, the study that we have actually has HCD pre-certified assumptions, safe harbor assumptions for ADU affordability levels. Certainly local jurisdictions, of course, always free to conduct their own analyses. You don't have to use our data necessarily. So next slide, please. This is a very simple survey of ADU rental listings across the SCAG region that we conducted last year. And the ADU rent listings that we were able to find, doing a combination of building a Craigslist scraper and checking and verifying to see that these are bona fide ADUs rather than homes with ADUs, gave us a rent range of about $650 at the low end for an ADU in San Bernardino County to the highest of $4,800, a fairly nice ADU, I'm sure, in Los Angeles County. So we combined this with HCD and HUD's rent levels for each of the 5 income categories you see here with a couple of assumptions, namely the number of people in each ADU and how many ADUs are occupied rent-free. And we ended up developing this breakdown. You can see here, it's by county with a couple of them combined in LA County, being the nation's largest county, split into two sections based on sub-regions. So we were a little surprised, but also encouraged, frankly, to see how many ADUs were being listed at rent levels which correspond to the income thresholds, or sorry, the rent thresholds for lower income households. In most good parts of LA County and Orange County and the Inland Empire, more than half of the ADUs can be counted in the affordable categories, in the extremely low, very low, or low, meaning that they really can be part of the solution to alleviating the affordable housing shortfalls that we know around here all too well. Again, local jurisdictions certainly can conduct their own analyses. If I may suggest, if there are local ADU rent or listing data available in a jurisdiction, that following kind of the steps and methodology laid out here, they're fairly straightforward and linked in the document that you'll find at scag.ca.gov/housing-elements. That would be one way to refine this analysis if you'd like. Next slide, please. All right, so the third piece of our technical assistance is the HELPR tool. That stands for Housing Element Parcel Tool. And as I've mentioned, it's really an extension of SCAG's open data portal, which has existed for several years, but this gives it a much higher level of utilization. The land use data which powers HELPR, which you see the example of here, comes from a combination of county assessor data and the quadrennial local input process that SCAG conducts with local jurisdictions in preparation for each RTP SCS cycle. So there's a screenshot here. The HELPR URL is currently linked to HELPR version 1.0. You can see that link at the bottom. The previous training that goes into quite a bit of detail on that can be seen at that YouTube page as well. Go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, HELPR is built on land use open data, but we also have added a lot of additional attributes which power the filters within HELPR, but can also be used by jurisdictions outside of HELPR by downloading the data. Specifically, I want to point out a few. The improvements to land value ratio, that comes from county assessor data, and that's just a bit of a back of the envelope way to compare the value of the buildings versus the structure as you kind of look to sites and look to which sites may be likely to transition perhaps into housing or a different use type. Slope information always helpful for understanding buildable potential, building footprint area based on aerial imagery, and right below that, kind of on the bottom row here, we have a pretty rudimentary proximity indicator. There are some there is some language in HCD's site inventory guidelines about affordable housing being somewhat proximate nearby to grocery stores, healthcare, open space. So we have a rudimentary measure of there if that's of interest in how you're evaluating sites. And on the next slide, we also have we are also able to provide a wide range of environmental sensitivity data. Most of these data came from existing third parties, such as CAL FIRE, for example. They're high and very high hazard fire risk zones. Some of these were also informed by SCAG's ongoing work on natural lands conservation. HELPR indicates whether each parcel in the region is within each of these areas. So this is certainly something to put a pin in, perhaps keep an eye on for other planning tasks down the road, updates of safety elements, environmental justice elements, perhaps even general plan updates. So good data available here that we'll continue to make available. Next slide, please. So HELPR version 1.0 has been live since December of 2020. So I imagine many folks have taken a look at the application and the data behind it. The logic is that there are a series of filters to help screen parcels based on factors which might be useful in deciding whether or not to consider that for future housing development. The basic filters can be refined further to explore, for example, some different land use codes or designations, or perhaps combinations of constraints, and they're additive so that you can use them in combination. There's also a download option, so you can use any of this data in Excel or a desktop GIS. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Tom, to talk about our broader technical assistance through the regional data platform and to give a much anticipated demo of HELPR 2.0. So thanks, Tom, back to you.
Thanks, Kevin. And before giving you a live demo of the HELPR version 2.0 that Kevin just mentioned, I would like to use this opportunity to introduce you to the Local Information Services team, also known as LIST. And the purpose of LIST is to coordinate, plan, and develop a system to link SCAG's value-added products, such as data and application that we are presenting here today, to address local information and analytical needs of SCAG local governments. 2 is to deliver technical assistance. These are one-on-one technical assistance for use of data and tools and modeling. And 3, to provide opportunity for local governments, such as yourself, to submit feedback on how SCAG can improve our product for better collaboration. And as you know, one of the immediate products in the list now is the General Plan Technical Assistant to assist you with the General Plan updates regarding housing, safety, and environmental justice, and some of the data that Kevin just mentioned earlier. And I will give you a more walkthrough of it in the HELPR application. And if you'd like to have a detailed walkthrough of the data and the tools, please send in your request today at list@scag.ca.gov, and we will schedule a one-on-one schedule technical assistance with you. So far, we have already conducted more than 55 technical assistance, and these are very useful and valuable. At least you know what available resources for you at your fingertips to use, for your housing element updates, your environmental justice and safety element updates. And now I will go into the live demo, but before that, please note that this application that I'm going to be demoing today is still in the final stage of development and should be available soon. The HELPR Tool version 1.0 is actually live and can be accessed using the link shown here. So, so let me stop sharing my screen and share my slide here. All right. Can you see my Chrome application? Okay. Awesome. So I'm going to give you a live demo of the application today. And this is pretty much how it looks like when you click onto the application. And the first thing that you see is the HELPR 2.0 splash screen, pretty much showing you the basic information, the methodology, and the reason behind why are we doing this, as well as the use limitation of the data. So please do read it before you use it. to understand about the data and the application. And if you already too familiar with it and you don't want this to show again, you can check the box here, do not show again, and it won't show again, or click OK. And this is pretty much the basic interface here, and you can look at the real state of the application. Our intention was to design it in a way that is clean and is simple for you to use. So today I will give you a very basic walkthrough of the components, but I will focus a little bit more on the ADU features. So there are several components that you see in here. The top component, the top panel, right panel, and left panel. So on the top panel, you can see SCAG logo. So when you click on that, obviously it will take you to SCAG's official webpage. The name of the application and the version is 2.0. And as you go to the right, you can see the documentation here. If you click on that, it will basically take you to a user guide of the application, where it has all of the basic information, the background and the methodology behind each of the data, as well as the data dictionary behind it. So if you do have any questions related to this application, this is where you should be. For this version, we also added, based on the comment we received so far from this, we also added several new features to this application. And one of the few features that you're seeing here is pretty much this function where you can take a screenshot and say, if you are trying to identify some area or some scenario that you develop using this application, you can just quickly click on it and it will take a screenshot of that of this current extent. So very easy to use, and you can quickly put it into your presentation if you wanted to present it to your stakeholders or decision makers. The next one is pretty much legend self-explanatory. It will pretty much populate and show you the legend of the active layer. So in this case, it's showing you the draft 2019 annual land use, existing land use data. And another feature, this is a new feature that we added. This is called a map layer. So we added several regionally significant map layer. So for example, if I'm more focused in SB 535, disadvantaged communities, and this is directly related to your SB 1000, which you may have to develop an environmental justice analysis. So you can click on that and you can see environmental justice in the area. In this case, I don't see any, so I'm going to switch to maybe HQTA, high quality transit area, and these are pretty much the future high quality transit area in the city, and you can see those areas right there for quick analysis. And so that's the map layer buttons, and on the right panel here, you can see search button, very self-explanatory. Put in your address or a place, it will take you there. This is one of my personal favorite in this application, which is the base map. You can actually play around with it. You can combine this with the screenshot there that I just showed you. You can turn on different base map. My personal favorite is really the modern antique map. I have a thing for map, and so this one looks really nice, and it looks great with the data here. For demo purpose, I'm just going to switch back to dark gray canvas so you can see the color pop out a little bit more. So, and then on the left hand side, on the left panel here, which is the meat of this application. So on the left panel, you can see from top to bottom, very clean and very easy to use. Select a jurisdiction. Obviously, you can jump right in, and you can search for that jurisdiction. So for this demo, I'm going to go to the City of Garden Grove. And another function here is really cool, is that if you want to see data outside of your jurisdiction, you can drop down, click all. So when you do that, it will show you the data, not just in the city, but surrounding city. So now you can have access, you can see all of the existing data, existing land use for the whole region. So let me just go back in Garden Grove. And as you go down, you can see this. This is the jurisdictional summary and statistics. This is a new function, new feature of this application where it gives you a direct summary of the total population and the final 6-cycle RHNA allocation number. And if you'd like to learn more about these statistics, you click on More Info button here. And if you click on this More Info button, we've designed and integrated a dashboard, a jurisdictional dashboard of housing statistics for Garden Grove in this case, and included some of the key statistics here. So you can see the population, housing units, and the percentage of owner and renter occupied, as well as the adopted final RHNA allocation, broken down by different income categories. And as Kevin mentioned before, this is directly related to the pre-approved certified HCD local housing data report that Kevin mentioned earlier. So below here is the link that you can click on it. And now it takes you to the website directly, and you can just type in the city that you like to go to, and you can get access to that report right away, and just pretty much click download and click Garden Grove here, and you can see all of the great information there for you to use. All right. And you can also print, export. And as you go down, filter parcels. So if you are familiar with version 1.0, so historically we had only a one-tap standard filter with all of the pre-selected parcel based on vacant land, vacant parcel, potential infill, publicly owned land, inside priority growth area, outside of constrained areas, outside of environmentally sensitive areas, higher opportunity areas, EJ areas, and locational scores, proximity to essential services. So that was included in version 1.0. Version 2.0, we have included another tab, which is called the ADU filter, where it's dedicated specifically for ADU because it's so important. And similar to other filter, you can have a quick instruction here. You can also click on this I button. So if you click on this I info button, it will open up another window where it provides you the methodology, the background, and pretty much all of the definition that you would like to understand more about such filter. So this information is consistent with the documentation that I showed you earlier. Similar to other filters. So if you go down and you're trying to play around with the application, you can just quickly click the I info button and you can see the definition there. And as you go down here, number of the selected parcels. So this is pretty much what's showing right now on the screen. So I haven't activated any filter yet. So the total parcel of the city of Garden Grove is about 32,000 parcels. And down here, you can download the data, as Kevin mentioned earlier, in tabular CSV format or shapefiles for additional analysis. And then this is something new that we added this round. This is the link where you can download the land use layer. So typically, historically, when you download the land use layer, it doesn't have the symbology layer, so you can just see one color. But if you have this layer and you can apply that to the symbology setting, now you can open up your ArcGIS locally, and you can see all of these great land use color for better visualization and better spatial analysis. All right, so that's pretty much the basic components of the application. And now I'm going to focus, give you a quick demo of the filtering system. So since I already have ADU filter selected, as Doe and Brian and Sora mentioned earlier during the presentation about the methodology of identifying potential ADU developable area. You can learn more about each of the definition here, and we have 8 different scenarios here for you. Different scenario based on the baseline assumption, based on the reduced setback from 4 feet to 2 feet, smaller ADU size from 800 to 600 square feet, or even remove parking space of 200 square feet, or a combination of these different scenarios, such as reduce setback and smaller ADU, or reduce setback plus remove parking, or smaller ADU plus remove parking, or even a combination of all of these reduce setback, smaller ADU, and remove parking. But one thing to notice that the variation between different ADU scenarios is fairly consistent. So as you notice, baseline assumption is pretty much the very basic baseline based on the state regulation and guidelines that Dole from Cal Poly Pomona mentioned earlier. This is the baseline. And I'm going to show you the combination of all of these scenarios. So from 25,000 to 26,000 is very close, similar to each other. So it doesn't have a high variation. So if you are a user and you want to explore different options, for my case, I'm going to see, okay, maybe I want to relax the ADU size a bit. So I'm going to allow maybe more than reduce the size from 800 to 600 square feet. And this is what I'm seeing here right now on the screen. And about 26,000 parcels that are eligible for ADU development in the city. And I'm gonna pop back on here, so because I want to see if there's any, I want to look at disadvantaged communities in the city and see if I can, maybe focus on certain area for incentivizing the homeowner, to promote equity and so on, or to improve air quality and environmentally sensitive areas. So for this one, I'm going to change to a different base map to look at it. So now you can see these ADU eligible parcels and the disadvantaged community areas in the city. So you can quickly look at, analyze the areas spatially on the spot. And if I like to, another feature of this function of this application too is that you can apply multiple filters at once. So now I have the ADU filter activated. Now I want to go back to this standard ADU and try to apply to see, I want to, maybe look at areas that are outside of the environmentally sensitive areas. So if I click on this filter right here, outside of environmentally sensitive areas, these are the parcels that are located outside of the areas and also eligible for ADU developments potential. And again, if you'd like to understand more about the filter, click on the info button, or you can just pretty much expand this filter. So when you expand this filter and you want to see what's included under this filter. And so once you expand it, we have included so many layers like Kevin mentioned, and these layers you can actually use for your safety element updates or even your environmental justice elements. And then one thing that I also want to mention too is that our team is also working with different stakeholders and the Nature Conservancy to develop another application called the Green Print. And that should be available fairly soon. And if you want to know more about it, please reach out or send in your question to list email. And back to this filter, you can see all of the criteria here, from fire hazard area to sea level rise, floodplain, earthquake, liquefaction, landslide, protected area, wetlands, and then so many others here. And the cool thing about this too is you can also go through each of them and you can modify it, like Kevin mentioned earlier. So this application can allow you to really modify and create your own story and show the data how you want. And then, so as you can see, from 26,000, now it's reduced out to about 1,700. And if you are happy with the selection that you have now, you can download it down to maybe shape file and include that with the land use layer. And so with this information, you can import it into ArcGIS Pro or ArcGIS Map, ArcMap, or even Urban or Community Analyst. And by the way, the licenses that SCAG is providing from the regional data platform you can request it now, and it's complimentary, it's free pretty much for every local jurisdiction in the region. And just want to give you an update. We have already onboarded more than 100 jurisdictions in the SCAG region already. So please do take advantage of this great resource from the regional data platform. And you can use these licenses to, and the data on HELPR to do more robust analysis and site suitability analysis. If you want to know more about it, please contact me, or again, email the list. Email list@scag.ca.gov, and we can provide you questions, responses, and any information that you may have. All right. Did I miss anything? Yeah, so I think that's pretty much the quick demo that I want to show you today. But of course, if you do request a one-on-one technical assistance, we can go much more in detail about the data behind it, and how to pretty much use the application and through each of the filter here for you. So again, this is still in the final stage of development, so it should be available soon, and we'll send out a link and the announcement when it is available. All right, so I think that's it for my demo here. So I'm gonna hop back into the presentation. And now I would like to invite my colleague, Mayon Johnson, to talk about SCAG's additional ADU support program.
For those who don't know me, I'm Mayon Johnson, Housing Program Manager. Also have worked on RENA, so most of you have probably talked to me in some form over the past couple years. But I wanted to give you an overview of SCAG's additional ADU support programs. My colleagues today earlier went over the different data sources and technical assistance available for you as you start identifying ADUs in your housing elements and how to implement them within your jurisdiction. So what SCAG is doing on the broader side of things for funding support, we have our Regional Early Action Planning REAP grant. This is a grant given by or administered by the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. And they are actually, they give funding directly to COGs such as SCAG to administer different types of programs that accelerate housing production and increase housing supply. So of course, ADU implementation, preparation in your housing element, those are eligible programs under REAP. So our two main areas that SCAG has developed in the program, we have $47 million available through REAP. And of that, $23 million was made available for projects identified by your local subregion, so your local COGs, identifying different types of projects. So actually 7 of our subregions, which cover about 134 jurisdictions in the SCAG region. So the large majority of jurisdictions will have ADU assistance through your local COG. So the subregions, we left it up to the subregions to take advantage of economies of scale, to look at local jurisdictions and your needs, and then identify what is needed to help accelerate housing production. So 7 of our subregions identified ADU production or acceleration of ADU production as a top priority. So these are the 7 subregions that have identified ADUs as an important component locally. And so the activities do vary according to what the subregions have identified. Some are more focused on identifying local capacity. So they're partnering with a consultant to try to tailor it towards local conditions. Others are focused on ordinance templates or streamlining the ADU permitting process. And others are also focused then on pre-approved ADU plans. So it'll be a lot easier to get ADUs implemented in your local jurisdiction. So the SRP, the Subregional Partnership Program, we're focusing on the economies of scale. So these projects total for these 7 subregions about $2 million. But it is intended to help local jurisdictions identify capacity, to identify best practices and tools and technical assistance, and also to help accelerate the production of ADUs within your local jurisdiction. The other program, main program we have under REAP is our Sustainable Communities program. The last call for projects ended in January, and we were able to award 8 different projects for local jurisdictions. We're still developing the scopes of work with these jurisdictions, but it's about $1 million tailored for planning projects related to ADU implementation. So those will be coming online in the next couple months, but we are dedicating funding sources for this to enhance it at the local level. Right. And at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to my colleague, Tom.
Thank you, Mayan, for the great information as always. So that will bring us to the end of our presentation today, and we can have roughly 16 minutes of open discussion, question and answer. And let me just stop sharing my screen. All right, so if it's okay, I would like to invite all of the presenters to turn on your camera, and we can try to respond to some of the questions here. I do see a lot of questions, and I apologize, I have not been able to monitor the chat. One of the question is the picture of this ADU handout is outdated September 2020. The latest is December 2020, correct? I think that's for maybe Linda.
Yes, yes. The questioner is correct. I should have updated the slide picture because the handbook was updated in December of 2020.
Got it. All right. Sorry, I see that you also responded, Linda. And there is a question from Jack. So what if are the ramifications if the ADU application is not acted upon within 60-day review period? And I believe this is for Lee and Maria.
So our understanding is that if it's not acted upon within 60 days, then it's automatically approved.
All right. Okay. What extent of monitoring is a city required to conduct if the ADU unit is identified as low income unit per RENA credit? Is a recorded covenant required, or is it good faith between the city/homeowner and the city/HCD RENA question?
I think that's really a question for HCD. I know that we would, if that question came to us, we would refer that to our attorney's office, our one attorney that is pretty knowledgeable in housing. I don't have an answer for that one.
The HCD FAQs on this indicate that cities in monitoring can use anticipated affordability that they garner from the building permit process, for example, or certainly if you have recorded covenants, those can be used. Right, so if in question about what you have, as Lee indicates, it would be appropriate to contact HCD.
All right, thank you, Linda and Lee. And then there was a question about the report that Dole mentioned and from Cal Poly Pomona, basically. So we are still in the stage of reviewing it, and that should be available for folks to take a look at. Okay. Okay. There was a question, can we download the ADU data? Yes, you can. When we pretty much right now, when you visit HELPR 1.0, which is already live, you can download any of the data on it. I would encourage you to not download the whole 5.1 million parcel because it's going to crash. But after you kind of select and zoom into certain jurisdiction, and you can download it. or if you'd like to have the whole database, let me know and I can give you the direct link. Or you can find that information already available on our SCAG Open Data Portal. So you can simply Google that SCAG Open Data Portal, and that's pretty much our open data portal of all of the published spatial data on there. So in addition to this really great data set, we also have other types of data set for you to take a look at. And when is the HELPR Tool version 2.0 will be available? So right now, as I mentioned, we are in the very final stage of the development, actually, and Esri has been working really, working with us closely, and they've been putting a lot of effort. So thanks, Esri, for that. But we are in the final stage, and we are still, looking at different tutoring and the visual capabilities and so on to finalize it. So I would say it should be available fairly soon, maybe a week or 2 weeks. Okay, so I think this is for Cal Poly Pomona here from Nick. What is the rationale for potentially allowing ADUs in very high fire hazard zones? And don't we have a big fire season coming? Wouldn't additional building materials requirements then be necessary for fireproofing ADUs in these areas? So I think there's this question, I guess, for Cal Poly, but also for local government.
Okay, so the actual answer to that is that Brian must know the name of the city. I mean, top of my head, I don't remember the name of the cities, but local government. What's that, Brian?
City of Los Angeles, the largest city.
Okay, so the city allows ADU development, even if that property is in the fire hazard area, as far as that there is the road that fire truck can access to the property. So we kind of borrow that idea from the city of LA, because that's the one good example that provide a more lenient policy than states law. So that's our logic. Obviously that's a fire hazard area, so there's a vulnerable property there. But as far as that there is a fire truck can access quickly to the property, the city allows that kind of development.
Okay, thank you, Doe. And then another question is about, so earlier it was mentioned that there was a goal to create local housing coalition throughout the region. Who do we contact if we are interested in part of a local housing coalition? And I think Jenna mentioned this, or maybe Linda or Maya know about this.
I'm sorry, the question is who to contact about interest in a housing
coalition, local housing coalition throughout the region.
So there are a number of housing advocacy organizations. The Southern California Association of Nonprofits, for example, has a lot of members participating there. But I'm not sure if Jenna's reference was to some that we were funding through the call for collaboration with the California Community Foundation. Those awards have been made. If you're interested in collaborating with one of those organizations, you can email us. We have that information on the awardees posted on our website.
Great, thank you, Linda. Okay, is there anything else? Oh, so there's another question about environmental justice elements. So as you know, SB 1000 pretty much require if you have disadvantaged communities in your area, and if you are updated two or more elements in the general plan, you would need to develop goals, objectives, or a separate each element for that. And that's pretty much the requirement. All right, any other questions at this point? And thank you for the great questions. But please feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions, additional questions for us. No questions? No additional questions? Well, if there's no additional questions, then I would take that we maybe did a great job and provide a lot of great resources today about ADU. And as you can see, we provided a wide range of information about data from the state all the way to local governments, and the challenges and the opportunity all the way to academic, how we utilize GIS and data to identify these eligible parcels. And the goal is really to start a conversation going and to show you the potential. The decision is essentially up to local governments to implement and carry on this ADU implementation. So we can do, we can help and we can provide all of the resources, but it's really up to local government to apply that. So we hope that this presentation provide you enough resources, and if we miss anything, or if we need to do anything else, to improve the data, or if you like to learn more about the tools or the data behind it, feel free to reach out to us, specifically, contact the list email, list@scag.ca.gov, and we can provide you additional information or even the one-on-one technical assistance. If you have any questions about the regional data platform and the complementary GIS licenses that we are providing to local jurisdictions, and that is pretty much free right now. So please do reach out as well. There are so many resources, but we hope that this is one of the great valuable resources that we provide to you today for your housing element updates. And Linda.
I just want to also encourage folks to go to the casita.org website, where they feature ongoing series of webinars of experience of individual cities. Coming up next is a feature on Pasadena's ADU program, and just last month we featured the city of Los Angeles's with standard plans in particular. So that's one of the increasing resources available for what local governments are doing at the local level.
Thank you, Linda. And this is last chance for any of our presenters, and you guys have anything to share with the audience today. All right, so with that, thank you so much, Lee, Maria, Linda, Doe, Sora, Brian, Mayan, Kevin, and then Jenna. And thanks so much, guys, for attending this great webinar today, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.